So it's my pleasure to introduce Andre Stackhouse, who I got to know when he was the tireless and really effective lead organizer of the March for Medicare for All last summer. I guess it was summer, wasn't it? A year ago. But it was a very effective march and brought a whole lot of organizations together to cooperate, which is what we need to do these days is cooperate. Andre is now the campaign director for Whole Washington, as I'm sure he'll fill in. He's got a degree in informatics, whatever that is. You can fill us in on that, and has worked as a software engineer, as a Bernie delegate, and co-chair of the Seattle DSA Healthcare Working Group and member of the DSA National Medicare for All Steering Committee. So Andre, take it away.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me tonight. And thank you for the introduction, David. I think the first time I talked here was maybe just about a year ago, maybe a little bit less, but it was primarily to ask for PNHP's support in the upcoming March for Medicare for All, which we held on July 24th of last year. And at that time, I was not campaign director of Whole Washington. I was not on any special committees for DSA. I really was just a supporter of universal health care, like so many of you here today. I guess what I'd like to say is that year has been quite the journey. And now I look at a room like this and I see a bunch of friends, colleagues, comrades, and just fellow travelers of this crazy movement for universal health care. And so I'm going to go through a fair amount of content with you all tonight. Who would have thought that healthcare policy would be so complicated? But I think that the place that I often like to start people is with our 2022 campaign video, because it provides such a great kind of high-level overview of what we're talking about here at Whole Washington. And then we will follow that up with just a little bit of additional information, take a break for Q&A, and see how everyone is feeling. So with that, I'll just jump into the video. So this video is on YouTube. It's called How Whole Washington Will Put Universal Healthcare on the Ballot in 2022. And I am going to share a link to it in the chat just so that you can all take it down and share it or watch it later in full. Washington State is home to over 7.6 million people. If it was a country, its GDP per capita would be higher than wealthy nations like Australia, Germany, and Norway. But while all of these countries have free universal healthcare systems, 6.6% of Washington State, or over 450,000 people, have no health insurance at all. What can we do to ensure that everyone has comprehensive healthcare no matter what? Or what can we do to provide healthcare that's always there? The answer is universal public health insurance. Senate Bill 5204 would create a universal public health insurance plan called the Whole Washington Health Trust. That plan would cover all Washington residents. That's right, everyone, regardless of age, income, or employment status, everyone's covered. It also covers everything. In fact, it's a huge expansion beyond traditional Medicare because it includes dental, vision, hearing, mental health, reproductive health, and much more. For a full list, go to Whole Washington's website. And it also costs between $5 and $10 billion less than our current healthcare system every year. And remember, that's without leaving anyone uninsured or in medical debt. So how do we pass it? Well, in Washington State, we have ballot initiatives. Ballot initiatives are a process in which citizens can collect a required number of signatures to put a law on the ballot to be either approved or rejected by a direct vote of the people. This is the process we use to legalize cannabis and marriage equality. So the question is, what about universal health care? According to the Washington State Constitution, the number of signatures we need to collect is 8% or more of the votes cast for governor in the last election. How many is that? Well, just under 2.5 million people voted for governor in 2020. 8% of that is just under 325,000. However, the Secretary of State recommends an additional 15 to 20% cushion to account for invalid signatures. For instance, maybe someone who isn't a registered voter or who isn't from Washington State signs our petition. So, an additional 23% cushion gives us a goal of 400,000. 400,000 total signatures to put universal public health insurance on the ballot. One thing you might notice about this is that it's actually fewer than the number of people who are uninsured. So, how are we going to collect the signatures? That's where the whole Washington signature captains come in. The idea is very simple. We recruit 800 captains, and we have them each commit to leading the collection of 500 signatures. What do we mean by leading? Well, the signature captains don't necessarily need to personally collect every signature. It's just on them to make sure that it happens. This is a leadership position, which means you will have support if you need it. Why 800 captains? Well, it's a big number, but it's doable. We know that there are thousands of supporters of Medicare for All and universal health care in Washington State. So the question is, can we turn 800 of them into signature captains? It's likely more captains than we would actually need to get the signatures, but we consider that a good thing because it forces us to focus on recruitment. Remember, we don't just need to get this on the ballot, we need to win the election. So it's important that we bring in as many people as we can. Why 500 signatures each? Well, it's totally achievable by a single person. Anyone can do it, but it's a large enough number that it naturally encourages the formation of teams, which is something we really want to encourage captains to do to make these goals so much more achievable. But even without a full team, this can be done in just 10 to 15 hours. So we really want to emphasize that you can do this. You can do this. And one way we're going to help captains succeed at collecting their 500 signatures is by making sure they have support from other captains through a buddy system. So, as part of your onboarding, you're going to be paired with a big buddy and you're going to be paired with a little buddy. And just like that, every signature captain will have a support system of 2 other people in the program that they can go to anytime they need help. Leading up to signature gathering, we're going to be very focused on recruiting volunteers and assigning them to captains to form small teams. Depending on the availability of volunteers and the needs of each captain, those teams may look quite different. Some captains might not need a team at all. Our goal is for every captain to have a team that they feel will make them successful. Now, sometime before signature gathering begins, each captain will be receiving a box containing everything they need to get their signatures. We're calling it the Signature Captain Field Kit because we imagine that you could simply hand the box to a volunteer and it would provide clear step-by-step instructions for completing the signature captain commitment. Inside that box will be at least 25 petition sheets and 5 boards for you and your team, as well as the Signature Captain Field Guide that contains all sorts of practical information like how to organize a shift, how to recruit volunteers to your team, how to do the data entry, how to send the petition sheets in. And of course, every box will contain a hand-knitted red beret as a gift and a symbol of solidarity donated by a volunteer craftivist in support of universal healthcare. So with a team, a box of sheets, a field guide for how to gather signatures, and a red beret to look great doing it, every signature captain will be well prepared to get universal healthcare out in front of voters and on the ballot.
We are planning on filing this initiative very, very soon, probably within the next week or so. The good news is that means we'll be starting signature gathering pretty soon.
and also that we are still in the place where we can make a few last minute changes to the legislation. So we are excited to reveal when we finalize it and file it, the ways in which that we've improved the legislation this year. Okay, so that's our campaign video. I think before I open up to Q&A, I would like to do a few slides that I have to just sort of fill in a few things to make it a little bit more PNHP specific. So, you know, thank you again for PNHP Washington for inviting us to speak today. I have come to know that PNHP, come to know their work as really fantastic in this space. They are in many ways the original single payer healthcare movement, and I think that we owe them all so much. And our campaigns have, or our organizations have worked together before, and so that's what I want to talk about, kind of in the spirit of the future. I'm sorry, that is not what I was expecting. There we go. Okay, so healthcare, that's always there. That's our slogan. We can get more into the details of what that means. I think the video does a pretty good job, but I'm not so much here to talk about the policy today. Feel free to ask me as many questions as you like, but I want to talk a little bit more about things that are new with the campaign. So the first one is that Whole Washington has a new campaign director, and that is me. David did a great job introducing me, so we don't need to go into all of this so much, but I just like to emphasize that I've been on a lot of different parts of the Medicare for All movement, the universal healthcare movement. I've worked on federal with Bernie, in my time on that campaign, and DSA Medicare for All National Steering Committee. I've done state, I've done candidates, and I've done ballot initiatives. And so in general, I've seen so much fantastic work on all different parts of this movement. And I always am looking to increase sort of the collaboration between all the different groups, because we know that we're all working towards a similar goal. And so while I am here today as Whole Washington's campaign director, I just often like to emphasize that really I think of myself first as a Medicare for All organizer, a universal healthcare organizer. And I like showing up wherever I see the work being done and the need for support. So that is the spirit that I want this campaign to operate under in 2022. Last bullet on this list was that March for Medicare for All lead organizer, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. And I just wanted to also add that I think that one of my primary roles in this movement, and as my role as campaign director of Whole Washington, really is to make myself accessible to everybody. I think a lot of people need, support on all sorts of fantastic actions. They need policy expertise, and we have a lot of resources that we've built up here at Whole Washington. So please get in touch with me. You can call me, that's my phone number. You can email me, and you can even just schedule an appointment with me. And the point of all of this is just that we're all in this together. And I think that the way that we're going to get there is if we can all mutually support each other. And as a Medicare for All organizer, it's really my job to show up for people and help them be as effective as they can be, help them be the healthcare activists that they want to be. And so that's why I try to make myself so available. Okay, so the Seattle March for Medicare for All, it was on July 24th of last year. This is a bunch of people taking to the streets. We marched from downtown Seattle up to Seattle Center. We had an amazing coalition. We had amazing speakers. So over on the right, you can see a bunch of just phenomenal Washington organizations. You have All Revolution Washington. You have the Sunrise Movement. You have Washington People's Party, Green Party, PNHP Washington, Healthcare for All Washington, Healthcare is a Human Right, Black Panther Party, Backbone Campaign, Showing Up for Racial Justice, Seattle DSA. This is a phenomenal.
Change the slide. Change the slide.
Oh, did it not go along?
So still on the first one.
Okay, let me unshare and then reshare my screen. Share.
Is it a PowerPoint?
Yeah, it's a PowerPoint. Here, let me, I
Good.
might have to stop sharing for a sec and then
Right.
reshare it. Okay, can you see it now?
Oh, it's loading there. Yeah. See a different. Yeah, this is the Medicare for All March, and there's
Yes.
Hugh Foy, who's on this call tonight.
Absolutely. So we have a great coalition over there on the right. We have great people marching in the streets. And then we have PNHP's Hugh Foy as one of the very generous speakers of this march. So just wanted to show that this was like truly a grassroots action that we assembled a great coalition for and really brought people out, made this a really visible issue. Other accomplishments. So the power of this coalition, we managed to get both Nikita Oliver and Shama Sawant as official speakers for the event, and they gave great speeches. And Pramila Jayapal unfortunately couldn't attend the march, but did provide a pre-recorded statement of support for grassroots organizing like marches. And we were able to play that as part of the march, and David helped us with that. So that was phenomenal. And it just goes to show you that we have a very effective and powerful coalition for universal healthcare out here when we assemble it, when we organize together, when we all put our minds towards a goal that we can work on together. Okay, so next point I want to make, collecting signatures is very fun. So a lot of people don't believe me when I say this, but you know, it's really easy to think of all the ways that a ballot initiative is a huge amount of work. Yes, it's a huge amount of work. We have to go out, we have to stand on our feet, we have to talk to people. People don't often expect that it's also very fun. So I have some photos from last year. So this is Count Bleeja Dry on the left. That is a prop made by the Backbone campaign, who showed up to several in-person events last year. So this was co-organized by Washington Can and the March for Medicare for All and the Backbone campaign. And we had a great time out there. And you have Bob Wickline on the right there, who was a performer at the march. He played an incredible Medicare for All song, an infamous Medicare for All song. And so that really brought some flavor to the march. And then in the middle here, you can see a bit of my clipboard that I hold the petitions on that I collect signatures with, some flyers for the March for Medicare for All, and then a bit of ice cream. And I have this picture because on my very first day collecting signatures last year, for the last three slots on that sheet, I went up to a group of people at a storefront window, asked them if they would be my last three signatures for the day. And they not only signed my initiative, but they said, could we buy you ice cream? Because they happened to be standing in the line for ice cream. And so the point here is that this is an opportunity for us to talk to our community about universal health care, most of whom have not spent a ton of time thinking about it. They pay the premiums, they have to wait on hold with their insurance companies, but they spend most of their time just living their life trying to get along. And collecting signatures to put this on the ballot gives us that means to have a very frank heart-to-heart conversation where we say, we want you to have health care. We want your parents to have health care. We want your niece and nephew to have health care. We want this to be something that we all feel 100% sure that we will have our entire life, no matter what happens to us. And that's exactly what you would be signing for and what we would be able to vote on as Washington State. This one, we don't need to get into this one too much, or we'll see how much folks want to get into it, but I just want to take the opportunity to remind everyone that this is not initiative versus legislature, and this is not state versus federal. And I know that this is not the way that everybody sees it. So all I can do is share to you the way that we see it, which is that we introduce our legislation to the legislature every year, and in fact would love for them to pass it. It would make our lives so much easier. It would save all of us a ton of time in meetings and on weekends that we spend organizing. for universal health care. So we would love to work more with the legislature, and we do believe that the legislature has it in their power to pass single payer healthcare for Washington, and really step up and take leadership on this. The initiative is just our way of saying that we are also capable of taking that leadership, stepping up and passing this. And the other one is state versus federal. I have a lot more content on that if you're interested in it. But again, we believe that that these movements are intertwined, that the real fight here is for universal health care and against private health insurance, against big pharma. And we can explain more how these are connected in a bit. But I say it's none of those things. It's a grassroots, bottom-up mass movement for universal health care. And the last point is that our coalition is growing. So, you know, we keep working on this and we keep spending all that time out there in our community. And these are some of the more recent collaborators and endorsers that we have. So I just had a meeting with Seattle Indivisible to talk about working together on this. We just have done events with Transportation Choices Coalition and the Washington Fair Trade Coalition. I did a die-in at UW. I could pull up the pictures of it if you like, but we did it at Red Square. These are the folks who organized the 1999 WTO protests. And we've been endorsed by orgs like Seattle DSA, Transit Riders Union, People's Party of Washington. So the more we work on this, the more people we get involved, the bigger our coalition gets. And I'm here today because PNHP Western Washington years ago endorsed I-1600, our first attempt at getting this on the ballot. And that was a long time ago, and it was a different ballot initiative. There's a new campaign director. The boards have new members and old members. The legislation is changing. So part of what I'm here today, and you don't have to answer now, but I do hope that PNHP Washington, as a new statewide organization, can get excited about finding those 800 signature captains, can get excited about collecting 400,000 signatures and having that conversation with the voters of Washington State, and kind of reaffirming their support of whole Washington so that we can continue to build this connection and work together more. And one of the ways that we've already begun to do that is PNHP Washington has been circulating the letter to stop Medicare privatization via DCEs. And I'm really, excited to geek out about the policy on this a little bit, because one of the ways that Medicare privatization has always been happening has been in the ways that Medicare was incomplete as legislation. And so the fact that it never covered dental, vision, hearing meant that many folks who even have Medicare would have to resort to a Medicare Advantage plan or a privatized Medicare plan in order to have those needs covered. And that's why it's so important that whole Washington's bill covers dental, vision, hearing. That's why it's so important that we've signed this letter, and we would love to continue to find ways to collaborate by really mobilizing that grassroots movement that we have towards things like flipping co-sponsors of bills, signing letters, having meetings. We need to involve the people with this. There's a saying in the movement, everybody in, nobody out, and they're usually talking about health insurance plans. And of course, we believe in healthcare system in which everyone's in and nobody's out, but we also believe in a healthcare movement that's everyone in, no one out. And my favorite thing about being the campaign director of a statewide ballot initiative is I can go to every LD, every labor union, every activist organization, every podcast and say, we would love for you to be a part of our campaign to put this on the ballot. You don't even need to be able to sign this to participate. If you're not a registered voter, if you're not a documented citizen, you can still hold a clipboard, you can still talk to your neighbors, you can collect a signature, you can be a part of this campaign. And if we really involve everyone, I think we might get it. So just a few calls to action, and then I would love to talk to you all about this and more. anyone in this room today can individually go to wholewashington.org/volunteer to sign up to be a part of the campaign. And you don't have to answer now again, but PNHP Washington, we would love to reconfirm, this partnership and add you to our endorsements page with the rest of our partners. And I know that there might be conversations that need to be had about it, so I'm just here to suggest it for everyone here today. And then next year, we're going to get out there in front of everyone. We're going to talk to a lot of doctors, nurses, healthcare administrators, voters, activists, and we want to bring them into this movement. And I know that it's an easy thing to just throw out there, but I know that certainly people would love for it to happen. But July 30th of this year is Medicare's birthday. It's also a Friday, and so who knows? Maybe we'll all be out there marching on the streets again together for Medicare for all again in 2022. So I am going to take a break now to talk to all of you. I've been talking at you a lot. The last thing, if we decide we want to indulge in this conversation, is I would love to connect this more to the national movement and explain how that works. And I've got, a set of information with another thing called Medicare for All Everywhere, where we can talk about that. But before we do that, I want to open the conversation up to everybody to ask me any questions that you might have, to share any concerns or suggestions. This is my favorite part of the job.
I'm wondering from PNHP what members' thoughts are, and if that is something that working with Whole Washington is something you'd need to take to your board, or certainly working with and endorsing would be two great steps. Your
Well,
thoughts?
Certainly something we'd have to take to the board, but we do have a board meeting this coming Sunday, so we can put it on the agenda.
And I would be happy to, follow this up, with any further conversations before on Sunday, if there were any further questions you had for the campaign before you were to, make any decision on it. Obviously, it's up to us to answer any questions you may have.
I have a couple of questions. Who's going to be the representative that introduces it into the legislature, and what's the timeline for the signature gathering?
Yes. So the legislation has been introduced into Congress by Senator Bob Hasagawa every year that we've done it. And that includes this year. The signature gathering period, we're planning on launching it April 15th, and it goes through effectively the end of December. So it's about 9 months. It's a long campaign. So in many ways, we're at the beginning, but also right smack in the middle. But we expect to be filing, by next Monday, and gathering signatures about a month after that.
I had a question that someone who couldn't be here tonight asked me to ask, and this was regarding the Medicare for All Summit this past weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Were you involved in organizing that?
So
there's a session on there that says, no, you can't do it through the states. It's got to be national. So I didn't have a chance to look at it. I watched most of Friday, but that was on Saturday or Sunday. But there were some people who saw that were upset that the organizers of the Medicare Summit seemed to be saying that don't do it at the state level. You can't do it. But that would be in contradiction with what Whole Washington is, doing, right?
yeah, so that summit was organized by one-payer states.
No, that was 2 weeks ago. The Medicare for All Summit was just this past.
Okay, yeah. So the March for Medicare for All, yeah, that summit.
It was organized by March for Medicare for All.
Yeah, so I can go into that a little bit. March for Medicare for All, I want to give them a ton of credit for sort of planting a seed last year that got many organizations to come out and organize marches in their city. I can say that I was one of the first organizers to join them. So the original plan was to march on DC. I believe the second march was LA, and Seattle was the third march to get a firm yes, because I said, yes, I will organize that. Now, they were all completely new organizers, is what I would say, with no strong ties to organizations out there in the field. And so, one, it was very difficult to bring in a lot of the sort of well-known organizations. And I think in part it was because, you know, they hadn't heard of this organization. But that organization made the decision to completely focus only on federal Medicare for all, and I would say perhaps even spend some of their energy encouraging people away from state efforts. In my opinion, it's a very unfortunate decision. They asked to formally disassociate with the Seattle, whatever you want to call it, the Seattle Twitter account, because the Seattle organization was largely done by people who believe in the possibility of statewide, and we're continuing to express that support. So we are not really associated with them anymore. And if we were to organize another march, we would probably do it independently. I can say that they weren't necessarily actually even that helpful last year. And so while they did encourage me to come out and organize the march, my main takeaway was that, we could totally organize one of these ourselves. It would be about the same amount of work. So that's kind of an update on that organization. We want to bring along everyone, but it is on, ultimately on folks to decide that they want to come along with this. But, if you want to hear my actual detailed answer, I've heard every reason in the world why it only can be done at national level. And I'm happy to go as into that as anyone wants to. And that would be what those slides about how this connects to national would be about. I just wanted to check in with everyone else first about other thoughts.
Well, I should say that PNHP means for a national health program, right? But I would say 90% at least of the state PNHP chapters are working on a state initiative if they have one. I'm talking about California, New York, the other states that have a chapter. They're also working at the two levels. And this is, I think our chapter here has encouraged working on both levels, although there's some differences in our board's opinion. So we'll have to talk about that on Sunday when we have our board meeting.
So I had me and our admin for the People's Party of Washington, we had a meeting earlier with the amazing Miss Fielding. I don't know if she's in here, but anyways, so we were talking about, I'm in District 6. I think your name was Lori, talking about that earlier. There is a homeless shelter out here, which is huge on Rebecca Parsons' list, and or priorities that she wants to fight for. And so we were all going to get all of us together and really focus on these people are trying not to open this homeless encampment out here because neighbors think, oh well, you're going to bring these horrible people here and blah blah blah. And what we were thinking, we got the April 9th thing coming up at Wright Park, hopefully, that I was looking forward to. But sometime around Rebecca Parsons' time, since this is her district, to get her out there fighting for that issue, have Laura come with us, kind of fight on, like you said, a multi-pronged approach. and kind of fight for this homeless encampment that is so needed. And the structure and the building of this program, I believe it could be, the model for forever change with the homeless community. So I think bringing those forces together, coalition building, like Andre was talking about, like that's huge. And I believe we have a really big, we can play a really big part in this and opening eyes in Kitsap County that no one even really knows about it when I walk around out here. So, I mean, certain people do, obviously, but not enough. And I think that's a way to really put it in people's heads, is fight for other people's issues while we're fighting for our own. And I'll yield the floor.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that that is one of the things that's really great is this issue lends itself so well to sort of intersectional organizing with other groups. So we just got that endorsement from Seattle Transit Riders Union, and they are running a ballot initiative of their own in Tukwila. And that means that we have a really good opportunity to sort of co-table with them. Another one is the Stephanie Gallardo campaign running for Washington's 9th district, is a big supporter of whole Washington. And she's a DSA candidate as well. And so DSA has been organizing tables with her, and sometimes we would co-table with her and her campaign. And last, in terms of like ways in which organizing for other groups can sort of even not be seen as you being generous with your resources, but a way that builds yourself up. We are organizing a trip out to Maine to help them collect signatures for their ballot initiative for universal health care in March, because this is a way for us to get out there, to train, to see how they do their work, bring that information back to Washington State, make some friends along the way, build some coalition, and hopefully some of that support comes back to us as well. So we really think that by organizing together, we can get a lot farther.
A little while back, a couple weeks ago, I spoke with a state legislator regarding the acquisitions and mergers bills that failed in the state house and Senate. And what's happening is, what was happening before, CHI Franciscan was charged with violations of federal antitrust laws, and but it didn't stop them. They're moving forward. And I asked the senator from the state, why did the mergers and acquisition bills were a slam dunk? They should have easily passed. And his response was that Olympia is tightly controlled by the hospital lobby. And that's true at the state level, and it's even more true at the national level. And if we don't all come together and support every action moving towards Medicare for all, if we don't start holding hands across organizations and across states, we're not going to get it. We're certainly not going to get it at the national level until people at the states start passing things like whole Washington. I was a Bernie Sanders delegate in 2016 and 2020, and it's very clear at the federal level, it's not going to get passed until we make enough pain to make them pass it. And that means we have to do it at every state level. So to do that, again, we all have to start linking arms, every single organization. Thank you.
And I would love to just add to that a little bit. So one thing is that I think we need to absolutely not underestimate the size of the work ahead of us. So I sometimes will hear people say, well, we tried this in the past, Vermont tried it or Colorado tried it and it didn't pass. And so that proves that we can't do this. And the thing that I always remind them is, who else tried it? Bernie Sanders and Harry Truman and Theodore Roosevelt and Vermont and California and New York and Washington. And if we are looking for a reason that we could fail, we will definitely find it. So the first is to recognize that we are in the business of doing what has so far been impossible. But the second thing to recognize is that because of the size of that task and the the number of failures we've seen in the past where we're hoping to succeed, is we need to recognize and have a little bit of humility. If you're saying, well, I know how we're going to pass this. It's easy. It's simple. This is the right strategy, right? I don't think that that's going to get us there. I don't think that anyone knows the way to get universal health care in the United States. If there was a simple, obvious, best way to do it, somebody probably would have done it. So I think of this sort of multi-pronged strategy, multi-strategies, multiple bills, multiple candidates, multiple cycles. It's like having a diverse portfolio, right? It's considered investing wisdom that you don't put all of your money into just one investment, right? And I think that we have to do the same. The other metaphor I often use is exercise, right? You lose the muscles that you don't exercise. So if we only focus on legislators, we lose our connection to the citizens, right? If we only focus on policy, we lose our connection to the more, most people don't understand policy and understand healthcare on a more emotional and sort of practical way, hands-on way, right? So we need to make sure we're exercising all of our muscles. We need to make sure that our strategies are diverse.
I was wondering, did you say that this year is a people's initiative?
So this is an initiative to the legislature, which
Okay.
means that
And last year was an initiative to the legislature.
correct.
Okay. And then what budget do you think it would take to get it through all of the challenges that arise?
Like how much money would need to be raised in order to win completely all the way to implementation?
The reason I ask is when I was working on the first initiative to the people, an attorney told me that she thought that the budget should be $400,000. And then HR developed a tool to decide whether they would support things or not. And one of the things was that you had legislature champions, not one, but a preponderance of legislative champions that could see it through. So I was wondering about the money first and the support we need in the legislature second.
Yeah, so in terms of like how much money it would take to get this on the ballot, I don't think it would take a ton. We're currently raising $20,000 just to cover the printing, which is one of the bigger expenses. And I'm really proud to report that we've raised about 5,000, but also 10,000 in matching funds. And so we're really well over halfway there. Now, if we're going to get this on the ballot and then win that election, I think we need to raise a lot more money, potentially $1 million or more. So really, all of this is premised on the idea that we're going to be able to grow and that we're going to be able to continue to grow our coalition. And the more we see it grow, the more people will want to support it. And the more people support it, the more people will be willing to donate to it. And the more people donate to it, the more it looks like we're going to win, the more people come on. So there's always that sort of act of taking something from an idea where it's a perfectly good idea that could work, but still needs to be executed, all the way to the point of we have passed the legislation and it's being implemented. And so, the road ahead is long and not easy. But when I think of two very important realities to kind of keep me moving forward on this. One is that we will never outraise the medical industrial complex. And so while money is very helpful to us and very useful, we're not going to win with money. The other is that there is one place where I always feel completely wealthy as an organizer, which is that this has the support of people, and people want this. People show up to meetings on this. People are willing to put in the work for this. And that is really just as valuable as money, actually quite a bit more valuable. And so, yeah, we work with the resources that we have, and we're always trying to build up to more infrastructure and more capacity.
How much of your legislation depends on the passage of Ro Khanna's state-based Universal Health Care Act at the federal level? Or what's the interaction with that?
Well, what I will say is that there seems to be disagreement on this among, healthcare policy experts. And so I always begin with what I believe, which is that the Affordable Care Act makes it clear that states can implement single-payer healthcare systems and can acquire a waiver to do so, and that it requires no additional legislation. That is how I understand it. And so I don't believe that we need to pass Ro Khanna's bill. I do think that Ro Khanna's bill would make it easier to implement single payer at the state level. One of whole Washington's innovations, I would say, is that we have sort of a way of passing the legislation, paying for it, and achieving universal coverage that does not require ERISA. So while even within that, we can agree that acquiring an ERISA waiver would allow us to make the best, most affordable, system. We believe that we can achieve universal coverage and pay for it without the passage of that. And so what we do is we effectively pass the legislation and we put a legal requirement on the board of the trust to acquire that waiver. So they're not in the position to say, we don't care to acquire the waiver. They're required to apply for and get the waiver. But we don't need to have the waiver first in order to pass our legislation.
Have you asked Gerald Friedman to take another look at things? Because you
Yes.
relied heavily on that in the past.
Yes, so Gerald Friedman is the economist from UMass Amherst who helped us write the financing portion of our bill and to run some economic analysis on it. And his 2022 report finds significantly higher savings than his original report. And so I believe we were talking about 10 billion in savings in his original report, and it is now closer to 14 billion per year. But the other thing, and I can tease this, we originally had a sort of individual contribution, a monthly fee. It was a graduated premium, essentially, never higher than $200, depending on your income level. But we had basically this pay for in our bill. And we, in discussing with Gerald Friedman this year and kind of looking at the new analysis, made the assessment that we could actually get rid of this fee. And it was by far the most controversial part of the payment structure. It's the part that voters would sometimes be least comfortable with. And so I'm considering it a huge win for us that we've been able to look at the legislation again and eliminate that particular payment stream.
One other thing, I hate to butt in, but Pramila Jayapal was the one who originally put that Ro Khanna bill out there. So I'm wondering if you could have Pramila take a look and make comments on the current whole Washington bill. Have you reached out to her about that?
So I met with Pramila's staff about a week or two ago and have tentatively planned to meet with them again. We would love to continue the conversation with Pramila. I actually have a short video clip from Pramila at a recent event that I think would tie interestingly into all of this, just to show where she's thinking on some of this stuff. So maybe after Christelle's comment, I can go into some of that bit about national, since that seems to be of a lot of interest to folks here tonight.
I'm relatively new to activism, but my whole life I've kind of been obsessed with the United States in general and understanding our history. And I feel like most of, like when you're talking about money, most of the money that we need isn't to actually get it going. States have an incredible amount of power. You just have to unite the people for doing it. So I don't understand, I guess, how you could have two people who are agreeing on universal health care. Like I said, I didn't go to the ones for the federal government, that don't agree that states could do it. And it actually, in some ways, would be a lot easier for states to do it because the people within the state have a lot more power. And to me, it just makes logical sense that, of course, our legislators don't want to take the lead in that. It's messy. Our healthcare system is already overtaxed. And so they don't want to bear the burden of implementing any sort of new system and then people pointing the finger at them. But if the people just have faith that, like, we can do it as a state, we could do it as a state. Washington is a very rich state. It's a very, like, we have more money than a lot of countries that do it. And we are short on things like healthcare providers and all of those things that would make lots of different things. To me, those are the actual questions, not how do you implement it monetarily. Washington can afford it. The people can unite and do it. We can force them to do it. We did it with marijuana. Look at Texas with abortions. I mean, that's a federal right, but good luck getting one there. And because of all the ways that the states can, impede, the states have way more power, and the people within the states do as well. But anyway, I guess I just don't understand because I've never been to, I'm not very politically active, and I'm starting to be, but I just don't understand how anybody could ever disagree that the states have more power. Again, just from my Google obsession with like our history and how our government actually runs. It's a lot like faith. Like, money doesn't actually exist. It only exists because we have faith in it, and we've said it has value. And the states, though, actually have way more power, and the people within the state have way more power to change a state than they do the federal government. And it has to be from the people up, because almost all elected officials are pretty timid about making changes. Like, and also the new value-based healthcare system, that's federal. And that actually sets up for a lot more reimbursement payments, because it's all about reimbursing like quality over quantity. So we're actually in the process of shifting from like the old fee-for-service system, which I don't know if you guys know anything about all that, but anyway, that's all part of what's being implemented right now within our healthcare system. There's a whole new way of reimbursing. And before, it used to be a fee for service. So you did a service, you got reimbursed for it. Now it's about value-based healthcare system, and basically like you're responsible for your outcomes and population health and all of these things, that all of our numbers would prove to be much better if we had universal healthcare in Washington. So that would force the value-based system that's already in place for reimbursing those things to start reimbursing us at the state level for it.
I just wanted to add that, as somebody who has worked up and down, state and federal, you start to notice a certain pattern, right? Which is your state legislators tend to say, this is a federal issue. And then the federal legislators go, I think we should see what the states do. And so the common thread between them is, please talk to somebody else. Please don't talk to me about this. I would rather work on something a little easier. At state and federal, there are different challenges at both levels, and I think that especially in a movement that has seen so much, loss and defeat and disappointment, we can often fixate on the obstacles and not so much the path to victory. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to do differently. And yeah, I have a bit more about that in the national portion of this, but
just briefly, I wanted to add the point that the legislature appointed a universal healthcare work group. Some of you are familiar with that, no doubt. The universal healthcare work group ranked their choices, and their first ranked choice was for universal healthcare managed by the state, and they identified the savings in the first year as $2.6 billion, and every year thereafter, $5.2 billion. So the state legislature in Washington, instead of jumping up and down with joy at that kind of savings, which were desperately needed in education, homelessness, etc., they began the Universal Healthcare Commission to study it all over again.
Yeah, and the commission is something that, like the legislature, we hope will result in state single payer, like high quality, comprehensive, nonprofit state single payer. But we definitely think that whether you're talking about the commission or the legislature, that really clear mandate from the people is what's going to influence the decision there more than anything else. And one of the good things about the establishment of that commission is also that provides the sort of permanent body that can, over multiple years and multiple administrations, continue to move forward the work of acquiring an ERISA waiver. So that's another reason why the fact that we passed that commission could be really useful to us in the implementation process while we're trying to acquire that ERISA waiver. David.
Well, I just like to raise some history here that's a little contentious and I think is improving rapidly, and that's the problems between Healthcare as a Human Right Washington Coalition that's got 40 organizations in it and was very much behind the Universal Healthcare Commission. In fact, there are several members that are on it. And in the early days, whole Washington trashed that commission. And I agree, it's moving very slowly. And the overwhelming majority are in favor of the single payer thing that Andre mentioned. However, are they really going to have the power in that commission? Because they have to, report to the legislature and so on. So the legislator's got to act based on what the commission recommends. And it's not clear what the commission is going to recommend because, it's dragging on and on, like 1 month, one meeting a month. But anyway, I think there was acrimony there from several of the Healthcare as a Human Right organizations had been working with some of the legislators on that commission to get it started in the first place. So when whole Washington came out against it, and I don't know if it was an organizational thing, but some of the more vociferous members trashed the legislators that really pissed off, some of the organizations that are in HICR. But I think things are mending now, and I agree that we all have to work together in this like a great web moving forward. And we're going to have individual differences, but we're all focused and we all agree that everybody needs healthcare.
Catherine, I would love to take your comment, and then I do want that to be the last one so I can save just a bit of time for the slides I have on national.
Oh, sure. I just want to, in regards to what David had said regarding 5399 and the commission, I just wanted to say, yeah, it was, I think, unfortunate some of the things that were initially said when it was first brought to introduced. But I want to remind you that the representatives of whole Washington never testified against that bill. We always testified other, and really just said it really didn't go far enough. It could go a lot further. And I don't know if Andre mentioned it, but the few changes that we've made to the initiative. But I think he mentioned it a little bit, but one of the things we intend to do is hopefully if the Healthcare Commission is able to, isn't stopped by the legislature, but and I've discussed that with some of them, is to allow them to take over the responsibilities of the Board of Trustees in the initiative, because it fits perfectly, and they both have the same purpose and goals. So it just makes sense to give them the duties. So we think that, like I said, we never really testified against 5399, but just that it didn't go far enough. So.
Yeah, I would love to just add to that, yeah, 5399, we just wanted to say that we hope that the outcome of such a commission is a universal single payer healthcare plan, and as soon as possible, is all we can ask of that. And yes, like that is part of our belief that it does bring value to this, and it is going to be a part of the conversation no matter what, because that commission is permanent. And we basically looked at our bill and said this establishes a board of trustees appointed by the governor to make the universal healthcare plan. The commission is a group of people appointed by the governor to oversee the state healthcare plans. And we said, great, so part of our bill has already been implemented. We have a commission now. The commission is the board. That's the direction we'd like to see the legislation go. But we will always make it clear that we think that, you know, the time is always right for universal single payer healthcare, and that was always the point we have tried to make with regards to the legislature and the commission. Folks, I don't want to keep you too late, but I did want to just continue this a little bit because I know that there's a ton of interest in it. So our movement is national. What do I mean by this? So this is related to some work that I'm doing. It is not directly related to whole Washington, but I hope that that changes very soon. So I have started another group called Medicare for All Everywhere. And this is my hope and my answer to how we're going to build that mass movement required to really pass Medicare for All federally. I think it requires a huge mass movement that isn't quite what we have, but is what is growing and being built. You know, just to take a quick look at where things are with Medicare for All federally, and this is not to speak down on it. In fact, I want to start by acknowledging that in the House, Medicare for All has more co-sponsors than everywhere, including a few new ones. So, and I've been hearing that they might get some additional hearings very soon. So really hope to see that movement continue in the House, but here is fundamentally still where we are, right? So we have a president who says he'll veto it. We have a Senate that has Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema in it, and we've seen how effective they can be at watering down and killing legislation. We have Bernie Sanders, who we love and who in so many ways is responsible for all of this. But he still has not introduced it in the Senate, and he doesn't return my, know why. We have the parliamentarian who apparently didn't think that the $15 minimum wage was a great idea, and so we had to just live with that. And then, of course, we have the Senate filibuster, which is infamous for being a very anti-democratic mechanism within a very anti-democratic chamber of Congress. And then in the House, we have the Congressional Progressive Caucus who would love to vote on it, but only if Nancy Pelosi lets them. And so what we have here is not impossible barriers, but we have some serious obstacles, right? And so my question is, okay, so this is what I was saying earlier. We support universal health care, but state legislators say that's a federal issue. Federal legislators, we should try that at state level, right? So the question is, how are we going to get past all of this, right? And this is from the DSA Organizing Guide, 2021 Organizer's Guide for Medicare for All. So they had a 3-plank platform, and plank 2 was building statewide campaigns for Medicare for All. And they say the realization of Medicare for All will not happen in a vacuum, nor will it be handed down from the top. It will be won through a bottom-up mass movement. And in order for that to happen, the grassroots effort at local, state, and regional level need to be built and interwoven. So that's the mass movement I'm talking about. Not state versus federal, but how do we interweave them into one mass movement for universal healthcare and against private health insurance? So a lot of people, we tell the story all the time of Saskatchewan and how Medicare in Canada was passed in Saskatchewan and kicked off the healthcare revolution that eventually had Canada's one of the finest healthcare systems in the world. The other story that I think often gets left out, surprisingly, is our own story. So we have the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, but what it was known for before that was as Romneycare. And so the point is that the states pull in both directions. Do you want to be pulled towards a single payer, like in Saskatchewan, or do you want to get pulled towards a private individual mandate system like the ACA? So I have no doubt that if we have another moment where we have serious federal reform on the table, we want to have good options available to us at state level to say, this one, we think you should pick Washington's or California's because it's already demonstrating that it's a better system. Okay, so this is like a little case study. The Electoral College is in the Constitution. It chooses the president. And this is not me speaking for or against the Electoral College, although you'll probably be a little unsurprised to know that I generally am not a fan of the Electoral College. But the important thing here is that the Electoral College was always told to me as this very deep part of the United States government. It's in the Constitution. And so if you don't like the Electoral College, you have to amend the Constitution. And what the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact recognized was that if you read the Constitution carefully, it actually says that the states can choose how they allocate their electors. So a bunch of states said, well, if we have enough electors that we have over 270 electoral votes, we could just give them to the winner of the popular vote if we wanted to, and then the United States would be effectively a popular vote instead of the Electoral College, and that wouldn't require an amendment to the Constitution. So if you look at this bar here, the green is the number of electoral votes that have already joined the compact. You can see Washington's there, Oregon's there, California's there, New York is there. But then in yellow, we have states with pending legislation. And if you combine the ones that have already passed and the ones that are pending, you have well over 270 electoral votes ready to join this compact. So what I see this as is by far the most serious challenge to the Electoral College, maybe ever, certainly in my lifetime. And so the point here is to recognize how it's not that a state can abolish the Electoral College. California can't abolish the Electoral College. A state can't abolish the Electoral College, but the states maybe can. And there's great power in the states, and Christelle was talking about this earlier. Why would we think that it wouldn't work at state level? And one thing that I always point out is, you know who never leaves the states behind? Big Pharma, the Republican Party. We see that they spend a ton of money even to fight state public options. So they know there's great power in the states, and so do we. Okay, so this is a bunch of organizations that have worked on single payer. I think pretty much all of these work on both state and federal single payer. And what I like about this is it starts to show a little bit of that mass movement. So we have a bunch of states, we have a bunch of campaigns. They're all working on Medicare for all, but they're all very plugged into their local politics as well. And one thing to remember is that federal legislators often start their career as local and state legislators. Okay, so here's the idea. What about a coalition of state Medicare for all organizations? So what are we talking about? Well, imagine we got 50 partners and they make decisions democratically. And the requirement for entry is that every partner supports both state and federal Medicare for all. That way, we're no longer factionalizing on this issue. Everyone here supports the work that everyone else is doing, and we do it at all levels of government. And so that is what we mean when we say Medicare for all everywhere. We mean Medicare for all here at home. We mean Medicare for all in California. We mean Medicare for all federally, Medicare for all everywhere. Okay, very quickly, what about one-payer states? This is the most similar organization to what we're talking about. And I just want to make it clear that we're not talking about competing with them or replacing them. We want to make all organizations more effective by specializing in what we're good at. So what's the difference? Well, one pair of states is an organization, and what we're talking about is a coalition. They are run by a board of directors, and what we're talking about would be more membership-based democratic governance. And then last, they spend a lot of time focusing on policy development. They work with healthcare professionals and legislators, policy experts, and what we're talking about is grassroots organizing. So if you can think of one pair of states as developing the policy that we think we deserve, Medicare for All Everywhere would be developing the political power to pass that policy and make it the law of the land. Okay, so what are some of the things that you can do when you cross state lines that you can't do if you just work in your state? So this is a puzzle piece map. I call it modular Medicare for all. The idea is regional health insurance, right? So I always say that the first state is going to be the hardest. But you can imagine, for instance, Washington, we could be the first state. And it would be a huge challenge, both to pass and maybe even to maintain, but it would be worth doing. But then imagine that Washington, Oregon, and California were to all pass single-payer healthcare plans. Now it starts to be a lot more feasible. People start to think, okay, this is working, right? Now imagine that they actually link those plans together. So it's not 3 states with 3 single-payer plans. It's one region with a healthcare plan that covers the entire West Coast. Now you're talking about a kind of economy of scale that you could actually imagine being expanded to cover the entire country. And I did promise that Pramila Jayapal had spoken on this a little bit, so I'm going to play this clip from a recent Medicare for All call. This was co-organized with Labor, and a really interesting question came up to Pramila.
Thank you, Pramila and Debbie, for hosting this event, and to the panelists for your excellent presentations. I have a question about what is happening at the state level, because what happens in states can create energy for what happens in Congress. We're disappointed in California. We couldn't get single payer through. We're going to keep trying. But I'm wondering, are there other states that may be moving closer to Medicare for all? And, or conversely, are there states that have really messed up healthcare and done such a bad job that we can point to and say, hey, this is one reason we need Medicare for all?
Who wants to take that?
I will just say that we were all counting on California. So that once California didn't work out, I think we were all like, I don't know, if California can't do it, what are we gonna do? I mean, the narrative is so important, and figuring out, and I do think there are states that have been doing a poor job. I mean, my own home state of Louisiana has struggled very much so with, even though we did Medicaid expansion, trying to figure out how we are going to extend, I would say any of the states that did not do Medicaid expansion count as the people who are doing the opposite of what we were hoping California would get done. And that we still need someone else to keep shooting that shot like California did. I would say Colorado probably could, Washington State, there's some states who do progressive things. Massachusetts is pretty close, so.
And Ted, I know our state, we're looking at that as well. You know, one of the challenges is that the states do need the federal streams of dollars in order to really implement well, which is why before I was doing Medicare for All, I had the bill, which now Ro Khanna has, to essentially allow states to use federal streams of dollars if they move to a single payer system. And we do need to make that legislative fix as well, because it does get more difficult for states to implement on their own. But for example, if you had California, Washington, and Oregon all together, and you were able to access those federal streams of money for that system, that would be the most effective. And so there is it's an important thing for states to do. There are some tweaks, or not tweaks, but changes legislatively that we could make to help states that want to go in that direction.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so I love that clip. One thing that it reminds us of, I know a lot of people at PNHP maybe are on Medicare. I'm on the other one, Medicaid. And so that is a plan that is, shared between state and federal. It's a thing that we expanded here at state level in Washington, and that's why I'm actually able to do this work and have healthcare. And so I think it's really good to hear Pramila sort of engaging with state as well. Okay, a couple more ideas really fast. This is the idea of cross-state fundraising. So you see here that some states are densely populated and wealthy, others are more spread out and less wealthy, and some states, very importantly, have more developed universal health care campaigns, other states less so. So what's the idea? Well, imagine if, say, Washington, Maine, and California were to do a fundraiser together, and the 3 states raise funds together, and then at the end of the day, they split those funds 3 ways. Well, a state like California that maybe has a lot more wealthy donors, a lot more people in general, that cut that they give away might not be so significant to them, but it could be a huge amount of money for, say, Maine. And I mentioned their ballot initiative earlier. They only need to collect 40,000 signatures. So a little money might go a long way in that campaign. So this is a way for us to imagine sharing resources. This one, cross-state phone banking. You could imagine this also as cross-state social media and other kinds of ways to share resources. So legislative sessions come and go, campaigns end, candidates lose, sometimes candidates win and we never hear from them again, but the movement for universal health care never stops. So last year, whole Washington had to suspend our campaign. Just a few weeks ago, CalCare had to suspend their campaign. Now, one way that things can go is everyone goes home and they stop organizing, and then in a year, they try to bring everyone back and say, hey, we're doing it again. Let's get the band back together. But instead, what if we redirected those resources to somebody who needs it now? So CalCare might have just suspended their campaign, but Washington and Maine, our moment is now. And so there's a lot of organizers in California, and there's absolutely no reason we can't organize them to help our universal healthcare campaigns, even if they can't physically be there. And as I mentioned, we're actually literally traveling to Maine. So it's not just digital. We actually can physically support other campaigns in other places. And then I have just a little bit about how states are different from one another. So deficit spending, it's often said that states can't deficit spend. But what I found when I researched that is that some states can. You see that actually Wyoming and North Dakota have no balanced budget requirements. So most states have a balanced budget requirement, and that's just a law that means that you can't deficit spend, but laws can change. And as I mentioned, 2 states don't have those laws. So you might not think of Wyoming or North Dakota as great states for universal health care, but maybe there's something special about those states that makes it more realistic in ways that we're not thinking of. So that's why I have this slide. Ballot initiatives are very important in some states, and in other states, you can't do them at all. So I talk to folks from Minnesota and Pennsylvania who say, I'm so jealous of you in Washington, because when the legislature tells you no, you can have an answer for them and say, we're going to do it anyway. But Washington has very, very powerful ballot initiatives. So the legislature cannot keep something off the ballot if we collect the signatures, and the governor cannot veto it. But in other states, they have weaker ballot initiatives or maybe no ballot initiatives at all. So the point is that depending on what state we're talking about, we might have a different strategy. A ballot initiative might make sense or it might not. And as stated before, ballot initiatives do not contradict legislative efforts. In fact, they go together quite well. You mobilize the people and you mobilize them to lobby their legislators. And then this last bit is to just talk a little bit about the answer to 2 important questions. The questions that people always bring me when they want to support it are, okay, but how are you going to pass it? And how are you going to pay for it? So I have this Venn diagram here, and starting with how are you going to pay for it, I have progressive taxation and public banking. So progressive taxation is something that we should all want, especially out here in Washington, where we have very regressive tax laws. But the point is, by tying it to healthcare, we can show people we're not just talking about increasing our tax revenue. We're talking about making a more just tax system so that we can have healthcare, so that we can have the society that we want to live in. Public banking goes even a step further because you're able to raise revenue without raising taxes. In fact, public banking is a really good way to develop local infrastructure, because what you can do is you can take out a loan from your public bank, and instead of paying interest that goes off to some New York bank, that money stays here in Washington, where it can be invested into more local state projects. And the last, small d, democracy. We also might say direct democracy, but this is the point. Legislators and legislatures have many ways of killing universal healthcare legislation. We've seen them. We saw them withhold the CalCare bill from even going to the floor for a vote so that nobody had to vote against it and look bad. We see how Build Back Better was watered down and ultimately, killed, at least for now. So the more of this political power that we can give ourselves, the more likely we are to actually see this through to implementation. So I think of the answer to these questions as, how are we going to pay for it? We're going to increase our economic power. How are we going to pass it? We're going to increase our political power. And I have a couple of little fun facts to point out here. So you remember Wyoming was the only state that could deficit spend? North Dakota was one of 2 states that could deficit spend. Well, North Dakota is the only state in this country with a public bank. But they proved that a public bank can happen. And there are movements for public banks here in Washington. In fact, part of the reason I love this is because Senator Hasagawa, who has introduced our bill in the legislature multiple years in a row, is also the main champion of public banking. So in that way, the Coalition for Public Banking and Universal Healthcare, the framework for that already exists here in Washington. And then down there, you see the unicameral. That's the Nebraska legislature. So they don't have a House and a Senate. They just have one chamber of Congress. And what that means is they have one fewer veto point. And you know what? That unicameral legislature is much more representative of their people than most bicameral legislatures. It's more proportional to their actual population. So the point is, the more of the obstacles that we can get out of the way of Medicare for all, the more likely it is to actually happen. And that is the idea of Medicare for all everywhere. We are going to increase our power until we have enough to pass this thing. So that's sort of my answer for how we connect this to the federal movement. It's not the only answer. There are so many organizations doing great work, NNU, Public Citizen, the local resolutions and everything. But what we love about the state approach is you actually get people healthcare on the way, and you can establish the idea of universal healthcare for an entire state of people, which completely changes the thinking and the narrative on it. You prove it's possible, you prove it works well. People say, oh, my Uncle Jim has that. I'm kind of jealous of it. So these movements are all very connected, and my intent is to connect them even more.
Okay, well, that was a lot to think about. But anyway, this will be recorded and put on our Pnhpwa YouTube channel probably in a day or two. And I'll try to put links to topics.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you,
That
David.
was
Thank you, PNHP Washington.
Fabulous presentation. I know a whole lot more about the strategy of whole Washington now. And I love your Medicare everywhere proposal.
Happy to work on it with anyone and everyone. That is the idea.
We should have a shout out to Catherine too for being the main organizer, or one of them, for the One Payer States conference a couple of weeks ago. That was just an amazing conference from beginning to end. And I think those panels and seminars are on YouTube, and I think I have the link. So when I put out the report on this meeting and our PNHP March monthly report, I'll put those links there. But that was an amazing job, Catherine.
Thank you, David. It turned out well. I was really pleased, but it was a lot of work from a bunch of people in One Payer States. So,
well, how many hundreds of people showed up for that? It was just...
I'm not sure. I was too much into making sure it was happening. I don't remember.
But that's
I thought we got pretty good turnout, though. Really.
Yeah, that's a really good resource. Particularly, I like Kip Sullivan's.
Yes.
One. So that'll be around.
I really enjoyed the ones with the 4 legislators. I thought that one was really good too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, anybody else have any closing words?
That was all extremely informative and uplifting.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.